Lucas, a shrewd and powerful businessman, was driven by an insatiable hunger for success and influence. But there was one man who stood in his way: David Miller, a respected philanthropist known for his relentless dedication to helping the homeless. David's reputation was flawless, his popularity ever growing, and his charitable work deeply admired. Lucas, frustrated by David's influence and good standing, devised a plan to destroy his rival's reputation and seize his place at the helm of the charitable foundation they both supported. But to execute his scheme, Lucas needed someone unsuspecting and desperate, someone who could be easily manipulated. His eyes fell on Sarah, a young woman he had noticed on the city streets, alone and destitute. She was the perfect pawn for his game, a homeless girl, struggling to survive and unlikely to question a powerful man like him. Approaching her with calculated charm, Lucas offered Sarah an escape from her desperate situation. He promised her money, food, and clothes, things she hadn't had in a long time. But there was a catch. He wanted her to attend an upcoming charity fundraiser where David would be present and create a scandal. Lucas's plan was simple. Sarah would pretend to be romantically involved with David. A single convincing kiss, captured by Lucas's hidden camera, would be enough to plant the idea that David was involved with a homeless woman. In the eyes of the conservative board members and the public, this would tarnish David's reputation, making Lucas's takeover of the foundation inevitable. As Lucas explained his plan, Sarah listened, torn between disbelief and fear. The offer seemed too good to be true. Money was something she hadn't seen in months, and the thought of a full meal and a safe place to sleep was tempting. But there was also a part of her that recoiled at the idea. How could she bring herself to deceive someone she didn't even know, someone who was just doing his best to help others? Lucas, sensing her hesitation, leaned in and reminded her of her circumstances. With a smile as cold as ice, he told her she didn't have many choices. This was, as he put it, the easiest money she'd ever make. Unable to ignore the promise of relief from her hardships, Sarah reluctantly agreed, her heart heavy with doubt. The night of the fundraiser arrived, and Sarah, barely recognizable in the elegant dress Lucas had provided, stepped into the grand ballroom. The room was filled with glittering chandeliers, polished marble floors, and impeccably dressed guests who chatted animatedly, holding sparkling glasses of champagne. As she looked around, Sarah felt out of place among the wealthy attendees, her anxiety mounting with every step she took. Despite Lucas's instructions to blend in, her hands shook slightly, and her heart raced with an uneasy anticipation. As if on cue, the crowd's chatter softened, and Sarah's eyes were drawn to the stage where David Miller was about to speak. Standing tall, his calm presence radiated a quiet strength that captivated everyone in the room. He opened his speech by sharing stories of the countless lives touched by the foundation's work. Stories of people who had lost everything but found hope and resilience through the community's help. His voice softened as he spoke of the cold nights, the uncertainty, and the feeling of invisibility that so many homeless people endured. It was as if he truly understood their struggles, and the compassion in his eyes was unmistakable. Listening to David, Sarah found herself unexpectedly moved. His words echoed her own experiences, her own fears and struggles. She hadn't expected someone as privileged as David to speak with such empathy and conviction about the hardships she knew all too well. For a moment, she forgot about the scheme, about Lucas's threats and promises. Instead, she felt a connection to this stranger who was speaking with a genuine passion, as if every word he uttered came from his soul. When David finished, the room erupted in applause. As he stepped off the stage, Sarah caught a glimpse of Lucas in the crowd, his cold gaze reminding her of the plan. She swallowed hard, trying to push down her growing doubts. But the more she tried, the stronger her reservations became. How could she go through with deceiving this man, who seemed to care so deeply for people like her? To her surprise, David himself approached her, a warm smile on his face. "Hello," he said, extending a hand. "I don't believe we've met. I'm David." His handshake was firm but gentle, and he looked at her with the same kindness he had shown the crowd moments earlier. Flustered, Sarah introduced herself, her mind scrambling for the script Lucas had drilled into her. But when David began asking her about herself, how she was doing, if she enjoyed the event, she felt a sudden urge to be honest. She stumbled through her words, trying to keep her responses vague, but David seemed genuinely interested in her. His attention wasn't just polite, it was personal. He asked her about her interests, her dreams, and what she hoped to achieve in the future. Each question felt like an invitation to open up, to trust him, to believe that someone cared. In that moment, Sarah felt her defenses crumble. David's sincerity was unlike anything she had encountered before, and her conflicting emotions grew stronger. How could she betray this man who had shown her nothing but kindness? As he continued speaking, sharing stories of his foundation's successes and the personal sacrifices he had made to keep it running, Sarah realized he wasn't the villain Lucas had made him out to be. Instead, he was a man deeply committed to helping others, driven by a moral duty that seemed unshakable. The more they talked, the more Sarah felt the weight of her decision. She was no longer certain she could go through with Lucas's plan, no matter how desperate her situation was. Yet, she feared the consequences if she disobeyed. Still, in David's presence, she felt a faint spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could find another way out of her predicament without betraying this man who genuinely seemed to care. As their conversation drew to a close, David glanced at his watch and excused himself to continue mingling with the other guests. He smiled one last time, thanking her for her company and expressing his hope that she enjoyed the event. Watching him walk away, Sarah felt torn between gratitude for the kindness he had shown her and guilt for the betrayal she had been sent to carry out. As Sarah watched David disappear into the crowd, she felt an unsettling calm wash over her. A brief moment of peace shattered only by the sudden appearance of Lucas by her side. His face was a mask of cold control, his eyes narrowing with impatience as he glanced at her. "You seem to be enjoying yourself," he sneered, his voice low yet sharp enough to cut through her thoughts. Before she could respond, he leaned in close, his words laced with subtle venom. "I hope you haven't forgotten why you're here, Sarah. This isn't a social visit." Lucas's gaze shifted to where David stood, talking animatedly with a group of guests. "It's time. Go to him. Just a quick kiss, a touch of scandal. That's all it takes to ruin everything he's worked for." Sarah felt her throat tighten. She had seen another side of David tonight, a side that was genuinely kind, one that cared about people in a way she had never known from someone of his status. The thought of betraying him now, planting a falsehood that could destroy his career, filled her with a guilt that weighed heavily on her conscience. But Lucas noticed her hesitation and with an air of practiced malice whispered, "You're not thinking of backing out, are you?" His smile was as cold as his words. "Don't forget, I've already given you the dress, the money, the food, all of it. And if you don't follow through, I'll take it all back." He gestured towards her elegantly dressed figure with disdain. "You're nothing without me, Sarah. Just another beggar on the street." Sarah's heart pounded as she felt herself being cornered. The sense of control she had briefly felt evaporated, replaced by the stark reality of her situation. She knew that Lucas was right. Without him, she would have nothing, would be thrust back onto the cold, unforgiving streets. Her resolve wavered, her hands trembling as she nodded reluctantly, feeling trapped but unable to see a way out. Satisfied with her reluctant compliance, Lucas turned his attention to David, who was still engrossed in conversation across the room. In a calculated stride, Lucas moved towards him, motioning for Sarah to follow. David looked up as they approached, his welcoming expression faltering slightly as he noticed Lucas's presence. It was clear there was no love lost between the two men. "David," Lucas greeted him, his tone feigned and overly polite. "What a noble speech. It almost brought a tear to my eye." The sarcasm in his voice was impossible to miss, and David's jaw tightened, though he remained polite. "Lucas," David replied curtly, inclining his head. "I'm glad you enjoyed it, but I doubt you're here to talk about charity." Lucas smirked, his eyes gleaming with calculated malice. "Actually, I'm here on a personal matter," he said, casting a glance towards Sarah, who stood slightly behind him, her gaze fixed on the ground. "I couldn't help but notice how close you and my friend Sarah here have become. Quite a touching scene, really." David's gaze flickered to Sarah, confusion and concern clouding his eyes as he noticed her discomfort. Before he could respond, Lucas pulled a phone from his pocket and flashed a series of photos on the screen. Photos of Sarah and David from earlier that night, captured in what appeared to be intimate proximity. The angles, though innocent, had been carefully chosen to imply something more. Now, imagine these photos in the hands of the press, Lucas continued, his voice soft but laced with menace. Imagine the headlines: Charity mogul romances homeless girl. Not exactly fitting for a man with your reputation, is it? David looked at Lucas with a mixture of incredulity and anger. You'd stoop this low just to harm me? Lucas, this foundation isn't about us. It's about helping people who truly need it. Lucas shrugged, unfazed. That may be true for you, David, but for me, it's about power, influence, and I'm tired of watching you hog the spotlight. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a menacing whisper. Either you hand over your position at the foundation, or these photos go public. David's face was a mask of controlled anger, his hands clenched at his sides as he processed the threat. He glanced at Sarah, who was standing motionless, her face pale with distress. She opened her mouth to speak, to defend him, but Lucas shot her a warning look that silenced her before she could even form a word. I won't give in to blackmail, Lucas, David said firmly, his voice steady despite the tension in his posture. These photos, this is all smoke and mirrors, a cheap ploy, and the people who know me, who truly know the work we're doing, will see right through it. Lucas's expression darkened, his patience wearing thin. Do you really want to risk everything on a moral high ground, David? His voice was almost a hiss. Think about it. A scandal like this could cost you your reputation, your work, everything. You may be willing to sacrifice all that, but can you say the same for the people who depend on you? For a moment, the room seemed to close in on Sarah as she watched the two men stare each other down. She realized with a sinking feeling that this was no longer just a scheme. It was a full-blown power struggle, and she was at the center of it. Torn between loyalty to the man who had shown her kindness and the fear of Lucas's retribution, she felt a storm of emotions churning within her. With every passing second, Sarah's internal conflict grew. She knew that one simple act, a staged kiss, could change the course of David's life and shatter the work he had poured his heart into. Yet, Lucas's threats loomed large, and she could feel his cold gaze fixed on her, reminding her of the promises he had made, and the consequences if she disobeyed. As Lucas's words echoed in her mind, Sarah felt trapped, pulled between her desire to escape her miserable life and the realization that, by following through, she would betray the one person who had shown her a glimpse of compassion. The lights dimmed as the MC called Sarah to the stage, her name echoing across the grand hall. Sarah's heart pounded, each step feeling heavier than the last, as she made her way toward the podium. Her mind raced, knowing that every eye in the room was on her, and she felt the piercing gaze of Lucas from the shadows. She could almost hear his threats replaying in her head, a warning of what would happen if she dared to defy him. But amid the weight of her fear, a stronger feeling surged, a feeling of justice, of truth, and a sense that this was her chance to make things right. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she stood before the microphone, her eyes scanning the crowd. She saw David standing at the edge of the stage, his expression filled with a mixture of surprise and concern. He had no idea what she was about to say. She could feel Lucas's eyes boring into her from the shadows, silently daring her to go through with his plan. But in that moment, something inside Sarah shifted. She realized that she couldn't go through with Lucas's scheme, not after the kindness David had shown her, not after witnessing his genuine dedication to his work. The truth was all she had left, and tonight she decided to stand by it, no matter the cost. With a trembling voice, Sarah began to speak. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sarah, and I'm here to tell you the truth, she said, pausing to gather her courage. She glanced briefly at Lucas, his face hardening as he realized she was veering off script. I was supposed to be here tonight to support a lie. I was sent to make someone look guilty of something he never did. Murmurs rippled through the audience as they began to sense the gravity of her words. She could see the looks of shock and confusion on their faces, and a surge of nervousness swept over her. But she pressed on, each word bringing her a little closer to freedom. Lucas, she continued, her voice gaining strength as she looked directly at him, approached me with a plan. He found me on the streets and promised me money, food, and clothes if I helped him destroy someone he considered a threat, David Miller. She gestured toward David, whose face was a mix of disbelief and relief. Lucas wanted me to pose as someone involved with David romantically, to make it look like he was using his power and position for personal gain. He planned to use these fabricated photos and stories to ruin David's reputation. The room fell silent as people stared at Lucas, whose once confident smirk was now replaced with a mask of rage. He clenched his fists, the calm, collected demeanor he always wore beginning to fracture under the weight of Sarah's testimony. But Sarah wasn't done. "I didn't know David before tonight," Sarah continued, her voice now steady and sure. "But after hearing him speak and seeing his genuine care for those in need, I couldn't go through with Lucas's plan. David isn't the villain here. He's someone who actually cares, who spends his time and resources to help people like me, the people Lucas looks down on, manipulates, and discards when it suits him." The audience's murmurs grew louder, shock and anger brewing among the attendees. A few people glanced at Lucas with suspicion, whispering and shaking their heads. Lucas, sensing the tide turning against him, attempted to regain control, stepping forward with a smug, dismissive smile. "This is absurd," he said, laughing hollowly. "She's a homeless girl, a beggar. How can you believe anything she says? She's only saying this because she didn't get what she wanted." But Sarah held her ground, refusing to back down. "If you don't believe me, check Lucas's car," she challenged, her voice unwavering. "You'll find my belongings there, the dress he bought me, the money he gave me, everything he used to lure me into this scheme. And if you look into his bank transactions, you'll see he paid for this dress, for my food, and for everything he promised. He thought he could buy my loyalty, just like he buys everything else." Her words struck the room like a lightning bolt. The crowd's disbelief turned to anger as they exchanged glances, their attention now entirely focused on Lucas. David stepped forward, standing by Sarah's side, his face filled with admiration and gratitude. As the reality of her accusations sank in, several attendees reached for their phones, making calls to confirm her story and investigate the truth. The board members, who had long harbored suspicions about Lucas's ambitions, watched him with newfound scrutiny, their expressions grim. Lucas, realizing that his carefully constructed facade was crumbling, lost his composure entirely. "This is all nonsense," he shouted, his voice desperate as he attempted to salvage his reputation. "She's lying. I would never." But David raised a hand, cutting him off. "Enough, Lucas," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I think we've heard all we need to hear." He turned to the audience. "You all know me, and you know the work our foundation stands for. I would never compromise our mission for personal gain." The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers drowning out Lucas's protests. Several members of security approached Lucas, their expressions stern, ready to escort him from the event. Defeated, Lucas's face twisted with anger and humiliation as he was led away, his last desperate glances directed at Sarah, who met his gaze without fear. As the room settled, David turned to Sarah, his expression softened. "Thank you," he said quietly, his gratitude evident. "You risked everything to do what was right. Not many would have done the same." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest, the burden of guilt lifting at last. "I should have spoken up sooner," she admitted, her voice filled with emotion. "I'm sorry for even considering Lucas's offer, but after seeing who you really are, I couldn't let him destroy everything you've worked for." David smiled, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "What matters is that you found the courage to stand up for the truth. That's more than most would do." As the event came to a close, David introduced Sarah to his colleagues, inviting her to join the foundation in a formal role. It was an opportunity she had never dreamed of, a chance to build a life of purpose, to help others as David had helped her. She accepted with gratitude, knowing that this was her new beginning, a path that was hers to shape and follow. That night, as the ballroom emptied and the last guests left with admiration for David's resilience and Sarah's courage, Sarah looked out over the city she once wandered as a nameless face in the crowd. Now she had a place among people who cared, and with David's encouragement, she knew that her past was no longer her prison, but a reminder of how far she had come. The truth had set her free, and with it came a newfound sense of hope and purpose, one she was determined never to let go. The tension in the room was palpable as the last of the whispers died down, and the weight of Sarah's revelation settled over the crowd. Lucas stood at the center of it all, surrounded by security personnel who now hovered just a step away, ready to take him into custody. The room had shifted in an instant, from admiration for the powerful businessman to a unified disdain for the man who had manipulated and betrayed them all. Lucas's attempts to defend himself fell on deaf ears, the crowd no longer willing to buy into his lies. His smug composure had vanished, replaced by frustration and desperation. He glared at Sarah, his eyes burning with anger, but she stood her ground, unaffected by his glare. Lucas had built his empire on deceit and manipulation, but now, for the first time, he faced the consequences of his actions. His reputation, carefully crafted over years of public relations and philanthropic efforts, was crumbling before his eyes. The foundation he had once led with an iron fist was now a symbol of his downfall, as the board members who had once been loyal to him turned their backs in disbelief. "Get him out of here," one of the board members ordered firmly, as Lucas was escorted toward the exit. His once cultivated image as the benevolent leader of a charity organization was now reduced to a bitter joke, his name forever tarnished by his greed and cruelty. Security moved quickly, ushering him out of the building as the room erupted into applause, the crowd's mood transforming from shock to vindication. Sarah watched in stunned silence as Lucas was taken away, his angry protests fading into the distance. It was surreal. She had never imagined a moment like this. A part of her felt an immense relief, knowing that justice had been done. But another part of her was still grappling with the weight of what had just transpired. She had risked everything, her safety, her dignity, her trust in others, just to tell the truth. Yet in the end, it had been worth it. Turning her attention to David, who was now standing beside her, she felt a surge of gratitude for him. He hadn't once judged her, even when she had been on the verge of making a terrible decision. He had shown her kindness and respect when all she had known was rejection and manipulation. David's gaze softened as he looked at Sarah, and for a moment, everything else seemed to disappear. The cheers around them faded into the background, leaving only the quiet moment between the two of them. "You were incredible," David said, his voice full of admiration. "What you did tonight took more courage than most people will ever know. You didn't just save me, you saved the foundation, and you helped expose the truth that so many people tried to bury." Sarah could feel her cheeks flush with the weight of his words. "I was just doing what was right," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what came over me, but when I saw what Lucas was willing to do to you, I knew I couldn't let him get away with it. You didn't deserve any of this." David smiled, his eyes reflecting a deep sense of gratitude. "And because of your courage, you've not only helped us today, you've changed your own life too. You deserve a fresh start, Sarah." Her heart skipped a beat. What did he mean by that? David took a step closer, his tone shifting to something more personal. "I want you to join the foundation," he said, his voice steady and sure. "You've shown me that you have the strength, the heart, and the commitment to help others. We have an opportunity here to work together, to give people like you, people who have been overlooked and forgotten, a chance at something better." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "You want me to work? For the foundation?" she asked, incredulous. David nodded. "Yes, I know what it's like to feel lost, to feel like you don't have a place in this world. But I also know that people like you, people who have lived through hardship, have something special. You understand the struggles in a way that most of us never will. That's why I believe you could help more people than you know." The weight of David's words settled in her chest. For the first time in a long while, Sarah allowed herself to imagine a future that didn't feel hopeless, a future where she could make a real difference. She had spent so many years fighting just to survive, but now someone was offering her the chance to thrive, an opportunity to build something meaningful, to help others who were stuck in the same situation she had once been in. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away, not wanting to show any weakness in front of David. I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice shaky with emotion. "This is so much more than I ever thought I could have." David placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Say yes," he said gently. "Say yes, and we'll build something good together." In that moment, everything she had gone through, the pain, the humiliation, the struggle, seemed worth it. She had finally found a place where she belonged, a purpose that stretched beyond just surviving day to day. David was offering her more than a job. He was offering her the chance to change lives, including her own. "I say yes," she said, her voice stronger now, filled with hope. "I'll do it. I'll help you." A smile spread across David's face, and for the first time that night, Sarah felt the warmth of a future she had never dreamed possible. The crowd around them began to disperse, but the sense of unity remained. People were talking excitedly, some expressing their disbelief over what had transpired, others discussing the incredible act of bravery Sarah had displayed. As the night wound down, Sarah stood beside David, feeling a sense of purpose that had once seemed so distant from her reality. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in years, Sarah had hope. The chance to work with David's foundation was not just a new opportunity, it was a lifeline. And Sarah knew, deep down, that she was ready to embrace it with everything she had. As the last guests left, David turned to her. "Tomorrow we'll start. There's so much to do, and together we can make a real difference. But for tonight, let's just take a moment to breathe." They stood there for a while, in the quiet aftermath of the chaos, looking out over the city, as if the world had shifted on its axis, no longer indifferent to Sarah's existence, but ready to offer her the future she deserved. And as the last of the lights in the ballroom flickered off, Sarah realized that this was only the beginning. A new chapter had just begun, one where she wasn't just another face in the crowd, but a person with purpose, with a voice, and with the power to change the world for others just like her. The weeks that followed were a blur of change for Sarah. It was as if a veil had been lifted from her life, revealing a world filled with possibilities. For the first time in years, she woke up each day with a sense of purpose, not just a need to survive, but to thrive. Her first day at the charity's office was nothing short of overwhelming. The sleek building, with its polished floors and glass walls, felt like a world far removed from the streets she had known so intimately. Yet, as Sarah stepped into the bright, open space, she was struck by a powerful realization. This was her new life. She wasn't just someone who had been given a second chance. She was someone who had the ability to shape her future, to help others like her who were fighting the same battle she had fought. David had personally welcomed her to the foundation, giving her a tour of the facility and introducing her to the team. The staff was warm and inviting, eager to see her succeed. They knew her story, and many of them shared a similar drive to make a difference. Sarah's heart swelled with gratitude. These were people who understood the weight of struggle, and they were using their positions to uplift others. It felt surreal to be standing among them. As Sarah settled into her new role, she was tasked with organizing outreach programs for the homeless. She worked closely with David, brainstorming initiatives that would provide not just food and shelter, but the support systems needed to help people break free from the cycle of poverty. For the first time, Sarah felt like her experiences weren't just an obstacle. Her past had given her the insight, the compassion, and the drive to truly understand what people needed to heal. But it wasn't just about the work. It was about the connections she made with the people she was helping. She spent her days visiting shelters, speaking with those who had no place to call home, and listening to their stories. Every person she met reminded her of herself, lost, overlooked, and desperate for someone to believe in them. And Sarah, having lived that very struggle, was determined to be the person who could make a difference. David often visited the shelters with her, providing the funding and resources necessary to improve the living conditions of the homeless. Together, they brainstormed ways to help people get back on their feet, offering job training, mental health counseling, and access to education. Sarah was becoming a key player in the charity's mission, but she never lost sight of why she had taken the job in the first place: to ensure that no one would have to suffer the way she had. One day, after weeks of hard work and planning, Sarah stood in front of a group of donors at a charity gala, ready to give a speech. It was her first time speaking publicly about her journey, and her nerves were on edge. She had always been someone who had stayed in the background, avoiding attention. But now, standing before a room full of people who had the power to change lives, Sarah knew she couldn't hold back. She stepped up to the podium, took a deep breath, and began. "Good evening," she started, her voice steady but emotional. "My name is Sarah, and I'm a survivor. Not too long ago, I was living on the streets, just trying to make it through another day. I had no hope, no future. I didn't think anyone cared about me or my struggles, but everything changed when I met David and when I joined this foundation." She paused, allowing her words to settle in the room. A few people shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to expect, but Sarah could feel their attention fully on her now. She continued, "David didn't see me as just a homeless person. He saw potential in me, and he gave me an opportunity to rebuild my life. Through this foundation, I've been able to help others who are still where I once was. And I'm here to tell you that every person, no matter how lost they seem, can find a way out. But they need your help. They need our help." Her voice wavered, but she pressed on, her words becoming stronger with each sentence. "I am standing here today because of the kindness of one person who believed in me, and I want to be that person for others. Together, we can make a difference. We can give people hope. We can help them rebuild their lives." The room fell silent as Sarah finished her speech. She could feel the weight of her words and the overwhelming sense of pride that came with telling her story. She had come a long way, from the cold streets to standing before a crowd of influential donors, sharing her truth. It wasn't just about her transformation. It was about helping others find their own path to redemption. As Sarah stepped off the stage, David met her with a proud smile, his eyes gleaming with admiration. "You were amazing," he said, his voice full of warmth. "You've come so far, Sarah. I'm proud of you." Sarah's heart swelled with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said softly. "You believed in me when no one else did. You gave me a chance to change my life." David nodded. "And you're changing so many others now. This is just the beginning, Sarah. You have the power to make a real difference." In the weeks that followed, Sarah found herself thriving in her new role. The foundation had grown significantly, thanks in no small part to the innovative programs she had helped develop. She spent her days working tirelessly to help those in need, always remembering the moment when David had first offered her a chance at something better. The lessons she had learned on the streets were now her greatest strength, and she used that knowledge to reach people others might overlook. One afternoon, as Sarah walked through the offices of the charity, she was approached by one of the new volunteers, a young woman named Emma. "Sarah, I just wanted to thank you," Emma said shyly. "I used to be homeless too, and I don't know where I'd be if I hadn't found this place. You've inspired me to keep going. You've made me believe that I can have a future." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she smiled at Emma. "I'm so proud of you," she said softly. "I'm glad you're here, and I know you're going to do amazing things." As Emma walked away, Sarah stood there for a moment, taking it all in. Her life had changed, but so had the lives of others. She had found her calling, not just in helping the homeless, but in showing others that transformation was possible. That no matter how dark the road might seem, there was always a way forward. And as Sarah looked out the window of the foundation office, the city skyline stretched before her, full of new opportunities, new challenges, and new hope. It was a reminder that her journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. With the foundation by her side and the unwavering belief that she could make a difference, Sarah knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. A new chapter had opened, and the future was filled with endless possibilities. As Sarah walked into her new future, filled with hope and purpose, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come, from the darkness of the streets to standing on her own 2 feet, with a job that allowed her to help others who were in the same struggle she once knew. It was proof that no matter how difficult life may seem, change is possible, and redemption is within reach. Thank you for watching Sarah's inspiring journey. Her story is a reminder that we all have the power to change, to help others, and to make a positive difference in the world. If you've been moved by her transformation, don't forget to like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that uplift, inspire, and remind us that hope is never lost. Your support can help us spread messages like Sarah's and reach more people in need of hope. Together, we can make a real difference. Stay tuned for more incredible stories, and thank you once again for being part of this journey.